Hello and welcome to another episode of the Women Developer Academy Speaker Series. Now, we have had two sessions so far, focusing on having amazing sessions by the WTM ambassadors who are also participating in the Women Developer Academy program, which is a program in conjunction with the Google Developer Experts program and WTM. Today, we are going to be joined by Jessica Randall, all the way from South Africa, as she gets to share with us insights that she has prepared on unleashing design uh, using Compose. Jessica, over to you.
Thank you, Alela. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a privilege to be able to speak to you about flow layouts. And the title for my talk is Unleash Design, Fluidity, Flow Layouts in Jetpack Compose. If you would like to get hold of me or reach out to me after the session, you can please contact me via Instagram at mathgeek199813 and on X at justjessza. So today we're going to explore flow layouts. So the first question most people would ask is, what are flow layouts? So flow row and flow column in Jetpack Compose are similar to row and column. It's just that the key feature or the superpower is that items flow to the next line when the row or column runs out of space. So this is how I depicted flow row and flow column with them riding waves. So that's how I pictured flow row and flow column graphically. So now we're going to dive into more about flow row and flow column and what they actually do. So flow row, from the name, obviously it arranges items horizontally, but then it wraps the next item to the next line if the width is exceeded. So in other words, if you have an item that is too wide for that row, it will automatically be wrapped into the next line. And then flow column, it arranges all the items vertically. So if the height is exceeded, it will wrap that item to the next column. We'll see this in the examples to follow. So let's look at some examples. So on the left-hand side of my screen, as you can see here, we have example of flow row. So what we have basically are ticket items. I think basically the scenario is like you're going to a hotel for accommodation and they have all these items that you click on and you want to arrange it with flow row. That's basically what this situation is. So you have like price high to low, you have stuff like free breakfast, free cancellation, the price, so it's 50 euros per night, and then the average rating of this hotel accommodation. So this is an example of flow row. So you see that this item that you would think would fit in here doesn't fit in here according to the width. So it's wrapped to the next line. So that's why you have it like this. And then on your right, I have an example of flow column. So I just put a bunch of names of people that I know and put it into flow column. Because usually when you look at a list of names, you think of a column. So basically what is happening in this example is that these three names obviously can't fit into the first column. So in other words, they exceed height, and then they are wrapped into the beginning of the next column, which is why Awal and Lady and Sadiq are in the second column. So now we're going to go through the syntax of flow row and flow column, and we're going to look specifically at the syntax I used for. Are we going to look at the syntax in a specific example? So I'll be referring to these two examples within the syntax slide. So this is the flow column code that I used. So at the moment, flow layouts are components in Jetpack Compose that are experimental. So I have to use the opt-in experimental layout API so that it will run. But also it lets the developer know that these components are experimental and it might change as updates with Jetpack Compose occurs. So you create your normal composable. I called it flow column example. Um, and then I created the variable text chip remember one state. So basically, what happens is we want the computer to recognize that when you select the chip, it remembers it. So that's why that is there. It basically remembers the state of the selected chip when you click on it. And then we have flow column. So in the round brackets, you can add any of the parameters that you wish to include in your flow column. So I wanted padding of 12 dp, so I wanted there to be space of 12 dp around all sides of the chip item. And for this example, in this code, I wanted it to be arranged spaced by 8 dp. And then after the round brackets, in the curly brackets, you place all the items in which you want to use flow column on. So under the flow column, I have all the items, all the names that was in the previous example. Like all of them are listed here. And that's how you use flow column in syntax wise. That's how you would write it. And then the same for flow row. I use the opt-in method again, and then I create a composable. I do the same thing because I want to remember the state of the selected chip. So when you click on the item in the row, it remembers it. And then the same flow row takes on the similar syntax as flow column. It's just that it's flow row. So in the round brackets, you put in any parameters that you want to specify with flow row. Like I wanted padding of 8 dp for around the chip items for flow row. And then in the curly brackets, you obviously instantiate the individual chips, or you place all the items that you want flow row to be executed on. In other words, you want flow row to happen for these items so that if it exceeds the width in the row, it will wrap to the next line. So now we're going to look at some benefits and applications of flow layout. So there are lots of benefits, but there's three main ones. So it manages to manage the dynamic content easily. So if you think of places in which you would need flow rows, so like, for example, if you're writing a book and you want text to automatically wrap to the next line, then this would be a good parameter to use, because it automatically wrap what doesn't fit on the screen into the next line. It offers adaptable layouts for responsive designs. So anything from like ticket items for hotel accommodation, anything from like reading like books online or in a application form on a mobile, you'd want it to automatically cater for wrapping to the next line. And it fits all screen orientations and sizes smoothly. So those are some of the benefits for flow row and flow column. And then some of the uses for flow layouts. So like I mentioned, you can showcase lists or image grids or product catalogs or hotel accommodation ticket items where you can filter. So like those type of features you can use flow layouts for. You can develop responsive UI layouts for varied devices. So it can be web, tablet, mobile, and you can design a flexible UI with dynamic content arrangements. So those are some of the uses of flow layouts. So now we're going to look at some flow layout parameters or flow parameters. So there are two different type of axis arrangements. So you have cross-axis arrangement and you have main axis arrangement. So I've focused on main axis arrangement in terms of demoing it and doing examples of it, but I will explain cross-axis arrangement as well. So for cross-axis arrangement, it's perpendicular to the main axis. So for main axis, for main axis arrangement, you have flow row and flow column that set the main axis, but the main axis layout direction is obviously horizontal or vertical. So for flow row, it's horizontal arrangement, and then for flow column, it's a vertical arrangement. However, for the cross axis, it's the opposite. So you do vertical arrangement in flow row, and you do horizontal arrangement in flow column. So that's the difference between cross axis arrangement and main axis arrangement. I hope that was clear. So now we're going to look at some main axis arrangements for flow row and flow column. So we're going to look at the horizontal arrangement in flow row. So horizontal arrangement kind of describes it, but basically it controls the spacing of items in flow row, and it dictates the alignment and spacing of those items. And you can also customize your arrangement with space by. So that's how you use horizontal arrangement parameter in flow row. It controls the spacing, and you can determine how you want it to be aligned and spaced. So we're going to look at some examples for these different options. So you have these different options like arrangement dot start. So if you don't define an arrangement, then the default obviously is the start position. You can also have arrangement dot space between. You can also have arrangement dot center and arrangement dot end, arrangement dot space around, and then you can also specify how much you want the items to be spaced by. So that's why I said arrangement space by n.db, where n is any integer that you would like it to be. Yeah. So I created like a little video or demo of the different arrangements, and then I also put like an example with it. So you can see how it actually changes with the real live example. So I used the original example that I mentioned previously. So you'll see that in this video, and I will explain as the video plays. So you have arrangement.start. Obviously, this is the default setting. And basically what it does is it aligns all the items to the start. So this is an example of the flow row being aligned to the start, as you can see in this example. Then you have arrangement.space between. So you have space between the items, but you don't have any space along the edges. And this is an example of this being done, space between. And then you have arrangement.center, so it centers all the items. So you can see all the things that used to be on the edges is centered. So in this example here, because they are quite wide in width, only 2 can fit in the first row. So that's why it's like that. Then you have arrangement.end, and it aligns all the items to the end. So you'll see all the items that were on the right are now on the left. So it's aligned to the end. And then you have arrangement.space around. Basically, it allows you to distribute space evenly around the items, and each item has equal space before and after it. So this is what it looks like when you try it with an example. Obviously, it looks a bit different because it depends on the size of the items. And then you have arrangement.spaced by. I used ATP, and basically it customizes the arrangement with spaced by. And obviously, with the space that needs to be with the space that needs to be in this row, it will cut. So that's why this next few items are wrapped to the next line, bearing in mind that I used spaced by. So that's why there's nothing on this end of the row. So it wraps according to how you specify as well. So even if I had to put it here, I won't quite get the space in between average rating and free breakfast. So that's why they move it to the next line. So now we're going to look at the vertical arrangement in flow column. It's similar to the flow row. It's just that we are controlling spacing on the vertical main axis, and it also affects items of alignment and spacing like horizontal arrangement in flow row, but we also have a bit of different options. So instead of start and end, we have top and bottom, and the space between the items are space between the items, but none at the top or at the bottom. And you can also use customized arrangement with space by for vertical arrangement in flow column. And I also created like a demo of what happens. So I did this with the original example with all the names. And I'm going to explain it while we go through this video. So we have arrangement.top. So basically it aligns all the items to the top of the screen. So you'll see, okay, this row is fixed. Sorry, this row is fixed, but you have the 3 items that wrap to the next column. And then in that column, it's placed at the top. And then you have arrangement dot bottom. So basically what happens, obviously everything in this row is fixed. There's not much you can move around with it. So the arrangement is acted upon the next column. So you'll see the 3 names move to the bottom of the screen, and it aligns the items to the bottom. And then we have arrangement.center. So it does the same sort of thing as the previous two. It will arrange the 3 columns in the next column towards the center of the column. So it aligns all the items to the center. And then I decided to add an extra name because I just wanted to see how the space between works. So I tried it with 3, and then basically how it works is we would have a wow and Eddie here and then Sadiq at the end. So I added an extra name because I wanted to see how the space between actually works. So I added the extra name, and basically they have equal space between each item in this column because there's space to play with. But in the first column, there is not much they can really do because it's already kind of full. So the space between will be implemented on the second column, and that's why you have spaces in between Awal, Anedi, Sadiq, and Jean. And basically, it's space between items, but none at the top and none at the bottom. And then I decided to do space by as well with the following names. So you'll notice on the original, there were more names in the first column, but the minute I said spaced by 8.dp, it's almost like the spacing increased a bit. So there's more names in the second column. I mean, not more names, but the rest of the names that don't fit with the spacing in the first column is wrapped into the next column. And that's why you have Hannah, Nathan with Awal, Nedi, Sadiq, and John. So that's why, that's how that works. And basically, space by is a customized arrangement. So it allows you to customize how you want your how you want flow row, flow column to customize how it should be displayed with what spacing. Yeah, and that's the vertical arrangement in the main axis. And now we're going to discuss the maximum items in a row or column. And yeah, so the maximum items in a row column. So you use max items in each row column to limit the number of items before wrapping. So like if you would want the first row to have 3 items, it will make sure that only 3 items is in the row, and then everything else will be wrapped into the next row, and in that row there will be 3 items, and if there's left over, they're wrapped into the next row. And then the default for this feature is you can use int max int. So for this, basically it fits as many items as possible in the row or column. So like if you don't specify how many maximum items you want in the row or column, it will try to fit as many as possible until it has to wrap to the next line. So an example is, I have one, I'll show what it looks like in the next slide, but basically an example is for the max items in each row, we can set it to 3. So it ensures that a maximum of 3 items per row, and then any extra items will be wrapped to the next line or next column. So this is an example of the max items in each row being set to 3. So you'll see no matter the sizes, it's still 3 items. So these are all varying sizes, and it wraps according to the maximum number of items. It doesn't matter what type of size it is. So like you'll see this one is longer than these 2 ones, but it's still 1, 2, 3. This one is a bit shorter than the green, but still 1, 2, 3. And then this row looks longer than the previous 3 rows, but the main objective is that it's got 3 items in each row. So that's how it wraps according to maximum items in each row. So the next thing to talk about is item weight. So basically, item weight, it allows your items to grow based on the available line space. So for example, in flow row, the weight considers the item on the line and not in the entire container of flow row. So it doesn't look at the entire container space of row, it just looks at the items on the line. And then you also have, also think the same is for flow column. We'll consider the items on the line and not in the entire container of the column. And then you can also build grid layouts. So you can build grid layouts using modifier.weight and maximum items so that you can create equal size grids of any size. So I did an example of equal sized 3x3 grid, which I'll show in the next slide. But basically, equal size grids provide organized presentation, and when it comes to pictures or images, most people like to use it just because it looks nice, like UI wise, and also it's easier for someone to read something that is equally spaced or equally sized. Yeah, so then just a note, if you have, so we're going to look at a 3x3 grid, which is 9 blocks, but if you had to have 10 items, the last one will fill the entire last column as a total row weight of 1F. So in other words, let me show, I'll explain further when I get to the example, but yeah. So I'll explain this in the slides to come, but basically, if you have a 3x3 grid and you have 9 blocks, right, to fill the grid, if you add one more item, instead of it being in blocks, you will have like a row that fills the last column as a total row. So it'll just be one solid block. That's what happens if you add an extra item to a grid. So now we're going to look at the example. So I did a customization of the color because I wanted it to be red. So I defined a variable that does not change custom color scheme, and I wanted it to be a dark color scheme, and I said I wanted it to be red. So that's what I created there, and then I created a composable function that applies this custom color scheme to this grid. So that's what I'm doing here, creating a composable custom flow grid theme, giving it a content and saying that I want the composable to go to like a unit function, and I'm giving it, defining the material theme and saying that the color scheme must equal the one which I already set in the previous statement, and that the content is the same, as just that the color would just be red. So I wanted the color of my grid to be red. So I created customization within the code. And then this is the part 1 of my 3x3 grid. So I created a composable function that generates a grid with evenly distributed items. So just a note, I didn't put everything in, but at the beginning of the code, I define the number of rows and number of columns, which is both 3. So onto part 1. So I created a composable good flow grid. I wanted the vertical and horizontal arrangement to be spaced by 4. So it got spacing of 4 between each item in each column and between each item in each row. And then I also created an item modifier. So I basically, in this section, I'm defining the appearance of each grid item. So I wanted each item to have a padding of 4 dp around each item. I wanted each to have a height of 80 dp, and I wanted the grid blocks to be clipped. So I wanted a round cornered shape of 8 dp, and I wanted it to be clipped. And I wanted the background color to be the material theme dot color scheme dot primary, which is what I defined in my previous slide of code. And then in part 2, this is when we kind of put everything together in a grid-like structure. So we define the column. We want the column to fill the maximum size. So I use full max size. And we wanted the vertical arrangement to equal the vertical arrangement. And then we use the repeat rows after defining the column. We define the row with the same notion of horizontal arrangement equals horizontal arrangement. And then we repeat the columns. And then we use a spacer just to stand in for each item in the grid. And we used a spacer with modifier, an item modifier of weight 1F within this grid. So basically what this line of code is, it's creating the grid of a, it's creating the grid, but within code. So that's why you have like repeat rows and repeat columns. And there's only 3 the value of rows and value of columns is 3. So it means repeat the rows 3 times, repeat the columns 3 times. And then this is what it looks like. This is what it looks like from the emulator, where I used where I created a flow grid. Basically, you can see the rounded, clipped corners, and the spacing is equal across and down for each column and row. And that's basically what my grid looks like, my flow grid looks like. And now we're going to go on to fractional sizing, which is also quite interesting because fractional sizing in flow row and row quite different. Just there's a bit of a difference. So fractional sizing. So basically, fractional sizing is the use of the modifier .fill max width, and then you put inside a decimal point or fraction, basically, which defines the item size. So you say, for example, modifier .fill max width 0.7, which means 70%, or 7/10. Yeah, that's basically, and then basically that defines the item size. And then in flow row and flow column, each item takes a fraction of the container's width directly. So we'll see an example of what that means like right now, and I'll elaborate more. And then in row and column, the items only take a fraction of the remaining width after other items are laid out. So we're going to dive into the code snippets with examples. So I did a fractional sizing with flow row. I don't know if this is a lot of code, but we break it down. So obviously we declare a composable function to display the fractional sizing layout. I called it flow layout fractional sizing. And then we create a flow layout with specific modifiers. So these are all the things that I wanted specifically for this flow layout. So I wanted a padding of 4 dp, which sets the padding around the layout. I wanted the background to be light gray, but I changed it to white in the example. But basically it just sets the background color. And then we have the horizontal arrangement, and I wanted it to be spaced by 4 dp, which sets the space between the items. And then I used max items in each row, and I set it to 3. So I wanted there to be a maximum of 3 items in each row. And then I created a modifier which will be used for each item, which is just basically how I want each item to look. So I wanted it to be clipped and round cornered shape of 8 dp, which means it just makes the shape of the sections rounded cornered shape. It creates the round cornered shape basically. And then I used a box composable with the height of 200 dp and the width of 60 dp, and I wanted it to be green. Okay, this did not come out as I wanted it to, but basically the second box is it's got a height of 200 dp, but I used full max width with a fraction. So I used 70%, and it's got a background of blue. And then the third box is height of 200 dp, weight 1f, and then I use the background color red. So this is the code for the flow row. And then this is the code for row. So it's the same in everything else. It's just that I used row for this code. So yeah, I used row. And then this is the difference. So in the flow row for fractional sizing, it takes up the container's width, That's why it's a bit more than the row. But in fractional sizing for row, it takes up the remaining width after these two are added. That's the difference between fractional sizing in flow with flow row and fractional sizing with row. So flow row takes up the fraction of the entire container. Row takes up the remaining width after the two items are placed. That's the difference between the two. And then I just want to explain the resources I used. So I used flow layouts in Compose, Jetpack Compose, Android developers. So I used Android's documentation for flow layouts. If you're interested, you can just say flow layouts, and usually it will pop up on the screen, and you'll go to it, and then they give you snippets. They give you like examples of code, and they explain the different parameters as I have. And then there's a link to GitHub where you can see how they implemented everything that they show on their page. So I used Android's documentation. And thank you for coming to listen to my talk. I really had a wonderful time preparing this presentation, and it was amazing experience. I just would like to say thank you to my many mentors that I have, but specifically Hannah and Ronnie and Harun for reviewing my slides, my code, and being there to motivate me. I really appreciate it. So thank you, and thank you to everyone for watching. So if you would like to get in touch with me, please via Instagram at mathsgeek199813 or on X at justjessza. And I would also like to say thank you to SlidesGo. I used their format of slides, basically. I used their template. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jessica. Before you run away from us, there's a question from the audience, and Tashinga is asking, if you use arrangement bottom, do the names fill up from the bottom or do they maintain their order?
So they actually maintain the order as like, let me just go back to that slide.
Okay.
So I can show you. Yeah, they do maintain the order.
As Jessica is going to that slide, if you have questions, kindly feel free to post it on the chat section.
So as you can see, so for the top, it says a wow and Eddie and Sadiq, like this, right? So when you go to arrangement.bottom, it keeps the order, it just moves this section to the bottom of the screen. And the same for the center, it will move it to the center of the screen. So it keeps the order, yes.
Okay, thank you. So Sylvia says this is actually closely related to Flutter, and yeah, Jackie's also agreeing with that. Again, if you have questions, Jessica still has a few more minutes to go, so you could feel free to ask her questions. But from the comment section, a lot of people are saying it was really, really a good, session that you led. Quite a lot of support, actually. Great explanation from one of our GDEs. They say this was a great, explanation. Great presentation. And yes, kindly, if you have questions, please post it on the chat section so that Jess could take it up. Thank you, Jessica. It makes sense for answering Tashinga's question. That's what he has to say. Anybody else with a question? If not, we will call it a wrap. And, turn off our podcast for now. Okay, I am going to assume that's it for now. Thank you so much, Jessica, for setting aside time to just walk everyone, through the topic that you chose. Sorry, and a developer, but I was like, okay, this is new. This is me learning. This is me, sitting for a class again. But I believe everybody who joined was able to get great insights from it. Again, she has shared her contact information, so please feel free to reach out to her if you have any more questions. Jessica, do you have any parting shot before we end the live cast?
Not at the moment. I just want to say thanks to everyone for joining, and I look forward to do many more presentations like this one.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. Next week, same time, we'll also be having a session, but this time it will be focusing on machine learning, led by Diana Muteo, who's also a WTM ambassador and a participant of the Women Developer Academy. Thank you all for joining, and I believe that's it for now from me and Jessica. Goodbye.
Bye.